All right, in order to do this job, here's the tools you're going to need. This is the special spline tool that we'll talk about that's used for adjusting the low and high speed needles on the carburetor. Regular Phillips screwdriver. Here's a little bit of a smaller one that's used on the backside of the carburetor to take it apart. We have a number 8mm Craftsman. This is to get the air filter cover off and just sort of casing plastic that's on top of the carburetor. And this is number 25 Torx. If you have a multi-tool like this, obviously you can use that, or if you have, a longer one that's more of a screwdriver style, works great. Here's the carb rebuild kit that I'm using, RB129 for the Zama carburetor. This is the spark plug that's in it. Right now I didn't actually change this spark plug, so this is RCJ7Y and this is a Champion. One thing I did want to show about this spark plug is just the color on the spark plug. When it's running right, this is the color that you should look for, a light brown color. So you just that's a good sign of what's going on in your engine. And in order to get the spark plug out, this is 3/4 socket wrench. And I don't show it in the video, but one other thing is just the carb cleaner. So carb cleaner with the little stick here. Once the carburetor is apart, just spray through the carburetor body all of the small openings that are in there. Use the little squirter attachment on there. Make sure those are all clear. When doing that, obviously, great idea to use safety glasses, especially when you're doing the carburetor, because you never can tell where those little squirts are going to come out. Sometimes they shoot right back at you, that sort of thing. All right, and then the last thing I just want to mention here, this is for a different saw, not the one we're working on today. The one we have today is an 18-inch. These are from a 16-inch. So there's two different kinds here. The one on the right here, you can get this at just the box stores, Lowe's, Home Depot, that sort of thing. One on the left is actually a carbide tip saw. So this will make a huge difference with your saw and how well it performs. You need to get the right one for your saw. You probably will have to order these online somewhere because it's not possible to just get these at box stores usually. Sometimes outdoor equipment repair, that sort of thing. I have a great time taking my saw to any kind of an event. I'm just a residential owner, that sort of thing. But any kind of service event where there's multiple saws, I can usually outperform people with my little tiny 16-inch saw. And the trick is, because I've got a carbide blade on there, and obviously the tuning and stuff helps too. The other thing too is just with the regular saw blades, you'll do 2 or 3 jobs and it's dull. You have to go resharpen it. You can sharpen it, take it in to get sharpened, that sort of thing. So there's just a lot of sharpening of the cheaper ones. So look into that if you want your saw to perform its absolute best. Look into the carbide tipped chains. You can also even order carbide chains online for special sizes if you don't find the particular size that you need. And when you order, you need to know what size your saw is, and there's numbers on the actual chain itself, different sizing of teeth, and the little linkages that go around the saw. So that's a sort of pro tip there. Use the carbide tipped chains. And then of course, whenever you're working on your chainsaw, make sure to wear your safety shoes.
All right, I'm including here really quick a diagram of the carburetor on the left side, showing the tank at the bottom with fuel filter. Then the yellow line represents fuel line going into the fuel pump side of the carburetor. And then coming out of the carburetor on the bottom side, this is the fuel metering side. It goes to the primer bulb. So that's the short side on the primer bulb, has 2 attachments there where the hoses attach. The long side then goes out and back into the fuel tank. I don't show inside the fuel tank in this video, but that's what's inside there, just in the box on the diagram. On the right side, these are the parts of the carburetor rebuild kit that I'll be showing in the video, taking apart the carburetor and then reassembling with all of these parts applied.
On this particular chainsaw, I already changed the fuel lines, which is a common problem that goes on these. The fuel lines get hard or cracked and just let air in. So those are pretty fresh. Put it back together. That didn't solve the problem, so now we're going to dig into the carburetor. So I'm taking the Torx screws out the top. There's 3 of them. This is a T25, and there's 3 of them to loosen here. And then one back here. You can get away with using a T20. Also, it fits close enough. You can just use that to loosen it. All right. cover off the carburetor, and this little pad might be sitting in there. Make sure that comes out as well. And then you're going to take off the two nuts here. So this is a number 6 millimeter. And then above it, another Torx T25 up here. All right, so then this little plastic shield will come off. I'm just gonna move that forward like that. We're going to be taking the carburetor off, so I'm going to take this. This is the choke arm. Just kind of pull that off. Put that over there, and then we're going to throttle linkage here. So we're going to push the throttle and just grab this and pull it out. Take that off. And then we can take the carburetor off, but we're going to have these fuel lines on here still, as you can see. So take these off and just remember where they go. This one here goes over to the primer bolt. So we got like that, and then this other one here goes down into the tank. So return line. Okay, so we got both those off. Okay, so this is a Zama carburetor. You can see on the front here, Zama. The part list for this carburetor is ZRB129. You can order this online. I'll leave that in the description. Or you can get it from a local repair. Here's some identifying numbers on the carburetor as well. W26B and the 48A. Okay, so next what we're going to do is take this cover off. Regular Phillips. Next we're going to replace these gaskets here. This one's a little bit crunchy. So opened up the kit, got my gasket here, little filament. Just going to put that right back the way it was. Line it up on the little peg there on both sides like that. And then put this back together. And you can wiggle it a little bit to get those pegs to line up. And you can move this. This is the throttle adjustment right here, so you can move it a little bit just so that it lets it engage, and then we'll put this screw back in. So most times when you see people where it's not working, or if yours isn't working, or someone throws a tool away, most times it's the carburetor that's messed up, these little filaments. This carburetor is interesting because it actually has 2 butterfly valves. You can see on the top here and the bottom. There's like a primary and a secondary, which is kind of unique. So when you're giving this one gas, you can see it from the back side here. It opens up 2 different places where fuel comes in. The next thing we're going to do is get into here, but obviously in order to do that, in order to get into there, we need to take this off so that we can access it. So we'll take these 2 screws off, pull this off, and then we'll access the back side here. Try that one. Doesn't work. Then go a little smaller. Let's put those there. And then again, you can see carburetor Zama on there. And underneath here, this will be fuel bowl where there's a needle and seat. It lets fuel in just on vacuum inside the carburetor. So this is what it looks like. And then here, again, a lot of times this will be crunchy hard. This one's not too bad, but we'll replace it. And then this little nub in the middle actually pushes here. And there's a little needle that we'll take out next, and it lets the needle up and down. This little teeter-totter, the needle's underneath here. When I first pushed this, when I opened this, it actually stuck. This particular carburetor carburetor isn't actually in too bad a shape with the gaskets, but that needle was stuck here. So we're gonna replace that needle, which when it's stuck in the down position, you won't get any fuel when it's running. So I'm gonna take this gasket off here. Just put that over there and take this out. And there's a little spring that activates this. Screw and then carefully pull this out. This is the little teeter-totter in the bar and the spring, and then the needle is still in here. Here's the needle. So this is the needle in the carburetor, and this one in particular, it's getting stuck right here. Sometimes this gets a little bit hard. Sometimes the rubber will stick, and sometimes these are made out of metal so that they don't stick as easily. So there's a little bit of a line in it, a little groove right there. So we're gonna replace that. Okay, so we're gonna put the spring in this little slot here, and then the needle goes here, little bar across, and then push that all down, and then put the screw in here to hold it all in. Okay, so I've got the repair part here. I kind of put it together, little teeter-totter there with the shaft and then the needle on the end of the shaft. It just fell off. I'm gonna put this in, and then I'm gonna put that spring underneath, and then we'll screw it back down like that. So the spring is right underneath this little indent here. I'm holding it down with the spring pressure. Make sure the little teeter-totter bar is lined up there. And then the screw goes in there. And you want this to be able to move really easily here. It should just very easily up and down. When the carburetor runs low on fuel, this little diaphragm button right here pushes it and lets more fuel in through the needle there. Alright, so now we're going to put it back together with our new gaskets here. Like I said, this one's not too bad. I've seen these being really crunchy before, which has the same effect. It won't push the needle down when it's really crunchy. So I'm just going to line this up the same way it was and put it back on. So we take the backing, and put our new gaskets on there, line these up the same way that they were on here, like this. And then get that lined up. There's a little notch that goes in the carburetor there, and get both of the screw holes lined up. Okay, now I'm going to put this back together. Alright, and we need to just put this back on. These two needle screws right here, that's the low, that's the high. We'll tune this once it gets back together, make sure it's running right. But if you want to use the right tool for this, you want to basically reach through the side of the cover. You want to be able to adjust these. It is this very interesting special tool. It's just got like a spline on the end with little ridges there. It's not a Torx or anything like that that's normal, so it fits right over those and allows you to adjust them once you have the carburetor back on. So that's what it looks like. Alright, so now we're going to put this back on. So we need to slide this on And we also need to reattach the fuel lines. All right, so I just wanted to show really quickly here the fuel lines and how the orientation is. I'm gonna show a diagram of what this looks like, just a simple diagram, but this can be tough because sometimes you'll get a saw where these fuel lines are all cracked and broken and you don't really know where it was before. So this is what it should look like when it's finished. Coming out of the fuel tank here, this is the pickup line. Inside there, there's a filter. It's kind of a ceramic rocky kind of thing. It's got some weight on it. Reason for that is so that it can move around inside the fuel tank. If you're sawing in different orientations, still pick up the fuel. Fuel comes through the line here and goes into the fuel pump side of the carburetor. So that's here. That's on the inlet side. On the outlet side, we're going out from the metering side of the carburetor here into the primer bulb. This is the shorter side of the primer bulb, and then out the longer side of the primer bulb, it then goes into the tank return line, and then there's also a little fitting on the end of that line inside the tank as well to try to keep that from pulling back out. One other trick too, when you're reinstalling fuel lines, it can be really tough to get inside here, so needle nose pliers inside the fuel tank can be helpful, especially the curved ones. I don't happen to have those, but one trick you can do on the fuel line is just to make a very, if this were the fuel line, a very steep diagonal curve in the fuel line, so you have a taper on the fuel line, and then you can put a piece of thread through that and pull it through to get it through these holes. It can be a little bit tricky, so pull it through enough and then you can grab it with the needle nose pliers and thread it through. So that one, and that one, and then push this on like that. So this goes here and then back. If you pull the trigger, you can then push this forward and thread that in like that. And then this is the choke button, so you're gonna kind of put that in like that. And this is gonna go on top. And put our Torx back. And our two nuts. And your dad joke for the day is if you're screwing this in and you drop it down here, what do you say? On nuts. Alright, so we just want to make sure everything's working correctly. This is the choke. See it pulling the butterfly there. Everything looks good here. Don't have any pinched fuel lines. So then we're going to put this top back on here. Yeah, like this. So it's nighttime right now, so we won't start this up right now, but we need to start it up, put some gas in it, and then adjust those low and high needle valves, and then also the idle as well. All those settings are right here, so you can see the L, H, low and high, and then throttle is this one here. And we'll adjust those with our special tool. And then this one is just going to be a regular screwdriver we can put in there. Keep the throttle just right, and that's actually that screw we saw when we took the carburetor apart. So just a quick overview of our fluids here. So this is the ethanol shield I talked about earlier. You can use in your gas to make sure that your diaphragms in there don't get hard and crispy and work correctly when you want them to. Obviously gasoline, and then we've got the 2-cycle engine oil. Make sure to pre-mix that according to whatever saw you're putting it into. And then the bar chain oil here as well. Pretty basic. Just recommend using that because it's sticky and it sticks to the chain as it's going around. So it's good to use that as opposed to something like, you know, used engine oil or something like that. All right, so now what we're gonna do is tune the saw. We're gonna use 2 tools for this. We're going to use the special spline tool that I talked about earlier, and then also just a regular Phillips screwdriver. All right, so we're going to do 6 primers on the bulb, and then we're going to pull the choke out. And if it's off, when we pull the choke out, it's going to push that red button up to start it up. And we're going to just start it here until we hear it sputter a little bit, and then we're going to push that choke in to the middle setting. There's 3 settings on this blue choke here, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to push it in the middle.
Okay, so we're going to start it up here and we're just going to let it run for a minute. The video is cut short so you don't have to see all of that warm up, but we just want it warm when we're doing these adjustments. So the next thing we're going to do is adjust the throttle down just so the chain on the bar is just barely moving around. So just counterclockwise is what I'm doing here, taking it out a little bit. All right, next is the high-speed needle. So we're gonna turn this in clockwise to lean it out until we get the maximum RPM on the saw. And then once we get there, we're gonna back it off until we start slowing down a little bit. And what we're looking for is the middle point between the maximum RPM and where it slows down a little bit, and we're gonna leave it there. Next after that is the low-speed needle. So first what I'm doing here is turning it out a little bit, and then back in, we're looking for the ideal idle. And when we find that, the RPM is going to increase a little bit. So a little bit of an adjustment there on the idle speed. And then what I'm doing here is just giving it a couple of hits, make sure that it's still running well when we gas it. So after we have the high speed needle and low speed needle set, we just want to adjust that throttle back down so the chain is barely moving around the bar.